Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session Heat 101 Part 2. We'll be starting just in a few minutes, allowing more participants to join the session, so stay tuned.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. May I welcome Professor Vidya Venugopal and Dr. Rob Mead to join the conversation. Thank you for joining us on this second session of Heatwaves 101. I am delighted to see some of you joining us here again. So in the last session, we talked about just the 101s of the mechanics of heat waves. You know, how does the Indian Meteorological Department decide something is a heat wave? Where did the data come from? What do states do about it, right? At a slightly scaled down version from the federal, what do the heat action plans look like? And then back down to the micro. What does heat actually look like when experienced in the homes, especially of the poor? Today, what we want to do is take this conversation outside of homes and outside of the built environment into the outdoors, where millions of Indians and millions of people in the global south that are going to be most vulnerable and at risk of heat waves will be working and experiencing the worst forms of heat exposure. We have an excellent lineup today. Professor Vidya Venugopal, Dr. Rob Mead, and Kathy Bowman, who's having a little difficulty joining the webinar, but should be here shortly. Professor Venugopal is an occupational hygienist and climate change scientist whose research focuses on heat and occupational health. Her PhD is in environmental chemistry from the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute. She currently serves as country director, NIHR, SRIHER Global Healthcare Research Center, and leads efforts to improve the health of marginalized populations worldwide. Dr. Rob Mead is a thermal physiologist from Canada whose work focuses on evaluating the physiological and health impacts of extreme heat and the efficacy of heat adaptation strategies in vulnerable populations. He's currently a research fellow at the Harvard School of Public Health, the Salat Institute, and the Mittal Institute. Currently, he's working with Community HATS, a heat monitoring project to develop and assess heat adaptation strategies in direct collaboration with informal workers and other at-risk communities. And you'll hear about his work as well. I'll introduce Kathy as she joins the conversation. Let me turn. I'm sorry. Let me turn to Professor Venugopal. Vidya, can you help us visualize what it means when we talk about the impact of heat on workers in India? What is the scope and the burden of this problem?
Sachit and the team, thank you very, very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to come and give my inputs in this and whatever experience I've had with working with heat impacts on workers in India. It's my pleasure. When we think about workers in India, we have this year's data. Just in the month of June, when the heat was the highest in India, Times of India has said about 40,000 workers were impacted by heat and to heat. So this is this sounds very bad, and this has happened because of the extreme heat conditions that we had in the month of June, just in Delhi. This is just not something that we see once in a year or something. This is something that I have been working with more than for a decade with workers who are working outside, not only workers who are working outside, but also workers who are working in small and medium, where the working conditions, the ventilation and everything is very poor, and these small units many of them do not come under the labor law. So there is no monitoring or anything happening, and no protection and everything. So when you think about these workers, for example, in India, we have a population of about 1.48 million people. And in a working age, we have about 673 million workers. 673 million workers. And about 74% of them are coming from the informal sectors. Informal sectors mean they are not protected by the labor law, and they are just there to protect themselves. They work and they protect themselves. So heat, when we speak about workers, it's just not about the ambient temperature we're talking about. Rob will agree with me. It is also about the metabolic workload that a person generates while they are working. There is limited automation in Indian workplaces. Most of the work is manual. And also if the ventilation is very poor, there is like exacerbated heat related illnesses that is happening. And the most vulnerable when you talk about these workers or the migrant workers, internal migration, I'm talking about just India, migrant workers who move from places to places, and they are given poor living conditions, tin roof shanties with very poor ventilation. Also, they have lack of basic amenities like drinking water or fans or something like not even electricity many places. And usually in employment, because they are migrant workers and they move, they work for longer periods compared to the 8-hour shifts that the locals could afford to work. They try, and it's also a behavioral change that these workers do, because they want to earn as much as they can because of the overtime and everything. And so the protective measures are very, very less. And also, when you speak about workers, the lower socioeconomic groups have a lot of issues. The socio-economic disparities further limit their access to any kind of resources for mitigation of heat stress. For example, they have limited access to cooling interventions. They have limited access to healthcare sector, health systems and healthcare. So they are much more vulnerable to heat-related issues. Lots of challenges, starting from the basic amenities, limited automation, out-of-pocket expenses are very high with these people. So it pushes them further into poverty and lack of social protection, because many of these workers move, they don't have this Aadhaar card or the social security card that is linked. So we don't even know what happens to them when many people die of heat strokes and things like that. So that kind of issue is there. And second, another important thing is many of these workers could protect themselves if they had some awareness about the magnanimity of the situation. Right? They are not even aware of the methods that they can actually protect themselves from heat. What are the individual heat protection methods that they can have? So that is what I would say is the situation currently existing in India. This is the negative part or the downside of the whole thing. But when you're talking about the progressive plans that the government has, they do have something called heat action plans for every state in India. Gujarat is doing wonderfully well, and many parts of Gujarat are really doing well when it comes to even worker protection. They have like healthcare training camps, they have cooling centers. This is just for the public, even the workers can use it. State and local initiatives are happening. Efforts include setting up temporary shelters, providing water and electrolyte packets to the workers. This is initiated by the government, so which is very, very good. And many areas, NGOs come in and they start helping. For example, Seva and everything, they do really fantastic work to protect these workers from heat. And the support of marginalized communities is happening. NCDHR, they advocate for inclusive policies, things like that. Also, there are positive things that are happening in India currently. And government is, because we have less data for policy, driving policies. Now the government has started advocating all the primary healthcare centers where these blue-collar workers go for healthcare to start collecting data on heat strokes and heat-related illnesses, which was not so much so in the last few years. So now the drive is on to collect that kind of a data so policies can be driven. But in spite of all of this, while these heat action plans tend to encapsulate heat interventions, some have communication strategies such as social security measures are very much lacking, making these initiatives a little bit ineffective, not little ineffective, more ineffective, and do not give the intended outputs for the money and the time and the resources spent on these initiatives.
You raise really important points in the vastness of the problem, right? 600 million workers outside. How do you even begin to wrap your head around that? The point to raise about automation is really important. I don't think that's in the consciousness of a lot of people who talk about outdoor work, almost equating outdoor work around the world. But you know, a farmhand in California or Texas, and not that they don't suffer, they suffer very differently. Uh, uh, with perhaps even less control, away from their families, and so on. But uh, work in India continues to be very manual, as you've pointed out, and that is a transition to Rob's work. Rob, you're a thermal physiologist, and we've talked quite a bit about how we cannot even begin to really quantify or draw sort of causal links between various kinds of heat exposures and impact on human physiology, because it's mediated by so much, and human behavior is a big part of it, right? You could be exposed to heat, but unlike a lab setting, people will not sit around wanting to be baked in heat, right? There will be impulses to either remove themselves from the heat or to start cooling down. You are not going to be able to continue to work the way you do. And if you do, the internal metabolism will drive up your core temperature. So it's really complex. And there are huge gaps in the evidence between what kind of heat exposures result in what specific issues around morbidity and mortality. In particular, the way we are quantifying the impact of heat on human beings right now is looking at excess mortality, or worse, looking for death certificates that actually have heat stroke or heat illness attributed, heat exhaustion attributed on the death certificate, which rarely happens anywhere in the world. Was it 5 days of 110 that tipped someone over? Was it 20 days of 100 degrees that tipped someone over? So how are you thinking about this, and what is it that the Community Hats group is working on?
Yeah, no, some very great points. We still have a lot of gaps in our understanding of heat, how it affects the body, how people experience heat. We know obviously it's very dangerous, but it's very difficult to actually quantify its effects on health. We know heat increases the risk of mortality and morbidity from a variety of causes. Some of these, though, are very hard to quantify in a lot of scenarios. So causes cardiovascular events, for instance, kidney injury. But more than that as well, is heat is just honestly just awful. We call this in our group the zone of misery, but it's not just about health itself. It's about, how it affects your ability to just live your life, to do work around the house, to take care of your children, that sort of thing. And another thing that we don't quite understand, I think, or don't understand as well as we need to, is just how to prevent the effects of heat. We know that obviously if you don't expose someone, or you can stay out of the heat, this is going to be very protective. But a lot of our adaptation strategies actually come from work in small scenarios, or even in laboratory work. I've actually done laboratory work for the past 10 years, and it's important to understand that when we do these kind of studies where we're assessing different work rest ratios, or we're looking at things like fans or limb immersion in cold water, for instance, for people at home, this is a person who's coming into a laboratory environment. We're sitting them honestly as close to my computer is for me in front of a fan. Maybe they're there for 8 hours, maybe they're for 3 hours. We're measuring core temperature, and then we're sending them back home. So this is obviously not, as Sachin was alluding to, like accounting for the effects of movement, of behavior, of all the things that we can't do. We can't just sit in front of a fan all day, or we can't just, stop working in some cases, as I'm sure Vidya will talk about quite a bit. And then this also doesn't capture these kind of cascading effects of what happens when this person leaves the heat. What happens when they go home? Are they even able to escape the heat? Do they go back home to a hot environment, and they're trying to recover for the next day of work? So we really need to kind of improve our understanding of not just heat as occurring during work, occurring during heat wave, but how it affects the body, how it affects individual livelihoods over prolonged periods. So to that end, we've actually initiated this very unique and exciting longitudinal trial. We here at Harvard, as well as in collaboration with the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEVA, and our partners at CEP University, And the goal of this work is actually to provide one of the first longitudinal assessments of how people experience heat, particularly actually women working in the informal sector in India, and how this heat impacts and cascades across a variety of different outcomes. So physiological responses, perception, productivity, etc. So to give you a very quick overview of what we're doing, essentially we are instrumenting the homes of SEWA members with very unique and small microsensors. Here's one like this, very discreet. We'll measure the temperature and humidity in their homes as well as their workplaces. And then we're also providing these participants with wearable technology. So Fitbits that can measure cardiovascular responses, can measure sleep parameters. And we're also layering in regular measurements of things like kidney function. We have perceptual surveys for well-being. And the beauty of this work we're really able to blend shoe leather epidemiology with some of these physiological measurements that are, you typically, consider them laboratory based, but are becoming easier and easier to measure because of the improvements in technology. And we're going to follow, hopefully, right now we're at about 100 houses deployed, hopefully up to about 1,000 for a whole year. So really get a sense of, the whole range of exposures and responses experienced by these workers. So yeah, very excited about this study, and as the data rolls in.
Fantastic. Just adding to Rob's point, when he mentioned about do these people get a break from heat in the evenings, and that has a very important role to play in the recovery from heat, right? So one of the studies that we did in Chennai, we noticed with the construction workers who were doing the metro work in Chennai. So most of them were migrant women who had migrant people who had come with their families. And when we did a study with about 340 women in Chennai, we found that many of their perceptions were that they are so fatigued in the evening that they did not get up from a break from heat. They have to go and prepare some meals for their family, and they all live in this tent shanties. So they use biomass cooking and everything, so it's even hotter there. So many of the women said they don't even have the energy to prepare a nutritious meal for the family. So it's just not the direct impacts of heat, it's also the indirect impacts on the families and what is going to happen for the future generation, right? So many of them end up eating something that is store-bought or something. So there are larger implications, ramifications of this heat.
Many of these women don't cease being workers when they leave the job site. There's lots of work to be done around the house and at home.
Yeah, that's true.
Gender angle that you're both referring to is really critical, because not only in so many societies around the world are women fairly invisible, but their work is entirely invisible, right? And we don't count this. Which brings us to a rather exceptional group and an inspiring global group of women, the Self-Employed Women's Association that Rob talked about, that Kathy Bowman has been working with as well. Kathy, welcome. To introduce Kathy. Kathy's been working towards creating visibility on the impacts of extreme heat for many years now, including as the founding and former director of the Ashrock Resilience Center. She's a CEO of Climate Resilience for All, a global NGO dedicated to protecting people and livelihoods from the multiple impacts of extreme heat. At CRA, she has led the design of the Women's Climate Shock Insurance Initiative for 150,000 heat and flood exposed women workers in India and Pakistan. Kathy, what is heat insurance?
Hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your forbearance on my technical situation. I'm very glad to see everybody again. Good morning and good evening, good early evening. So heat insurance, we often have a situation where, and it's just very well described it from Robin Vidya, the idea that income is lost from extreme heat and it's invisible. Extreme heat itself is invisible and silent. And so this is one of the most challenging aspects. And our organization is focused on women and vulnerable communities facing the threats of extreme heat and really understanding what they are, specifically livelihoods, income, and the knock-on effects of it. And we have and this is very interesting because there's going to be an announcement today from the UN Secretary General on extreme heat. And it's very exciting because it's beginning to give visibility to something that is not deeply found in policy or in financing or in data sets. And we're just beginning to understand. And we may understand it anecdotally, and I'm sure we can tell you lots of stories, everybody on this screen. But in terms of finding a quick stat that tells you this is the difference in income globally that women are experiencing in terms of loss, it's not there. And so it's highlighting a research agenda, that's one thing, but it's also making interventions and responding more challenging. And so heat insurance is the beginnings of recognizing the economic relationship that heat has to a woman and her family, her livelihood. So often women are the sole breadwinner. And so, Rob, when you said, there's a lot more work to be done, I mean, that is an understatement. They just switch jobs and then switch again. And so, for some very clear examples of income lost, men are able to work shifts that are at cooler times of the day. Women are not. Women have to take care of their kids and feed them, get dinner ready, get them ready for their bedtime routine, and men can work. So that takes the income down. Women in Pakistan, with an organization we work with called Quendo Core, they're not allowed to sleep outside for cultural and gender norm reasons. And so the men and the boys can sleep outside where it's cool and the breeze is, and the women are inside roasting. Their clothing differences and what we're wearing, the emotional work of caring for not just the physical care, but the emotional work of elderly relatives and parents. And we did some analysis that found that it's this, it's a triple whammy. You yourself are sick because women are physiologically disproportionately affected by heat for lots of reasons, temperature regulation, hormones. Pregnancy is a very vulnerable time. And then you're sick, and then your family's sick too because they're hot and they're not sleeping at night, which that's such an important point. And so you've taken care of your elderly parents and you're taking care of your kids that don't feel so good. You might even be taking care of your husband, and you're trying to take care of yourself, and you're trying to work, and you're making dinner. And so this is not a future that we want. It's not good for anybody. And our motto at Climate Resilience for All is, when women are climate resilient, we will all be climate resilient. And we know women are the backbones of communities, and we'll increasingly see that with economic data and such. And there's some fantastic new numbers that we are using to look at the difference of a female-headed household and the way heat comes down on that household versus a household headed by a male. And so there are big differences, and there are some numbers. But heat insurance, now I'm going to answer your question, Sachi. Heat insurance is a way to, when the temperatures come to that dangerous level, replace income, or supplement, I think is a better word, supplement income lost from the way that extreme heat is impacting specific trades. And so SEVA is, that's the Self-Employed Women's Association, is a labor union, and they have almost 3 million members. Those members are divided by trade. And so we, working with them, and our two program officers are medical doctors. And so we're really learning a lot about the specific health effects, and the project that Sachit is leading around understanding, and that Rob is working on, is going to be, a cascade of information to really calibrate these interventions and these financial instruments to be the most beneficial. But the idea is that, and think about heat, a rash that workers, waste recyclers, construction workers, street vendors, ship breakers, head loaders, home-based workers, farmers, all heat exposed. And so their bodies are suffering, the stuff they're selling or growing is suffering. That just means money drained away. And on average, they were making $3 a day. We don't say that anymore. It's more like $2.50 because of the heat. and flood, which, you know, today we're talking about heat. So I want to have a good flow of conversation, so I'm going to stop there. But it is a parametric product. Okay, I'm not quite going to stop. It's a parametric product, and it pays when a certain trigger is met. So para meaning by, metric meaning a measure. It's not a mainstream product, but it's becoming more so because it's very flexible and it pays quickly. Not, and there's a lot of caveats in here, and we can dig into them. But in essence, 50,000 women in the program, all 50,000 had some benefit from a cash payout, and 92% of them had a range between $7.80 and $19.45 of cash plus insurance payouts. No, that's just insurance, plus the $5 in cash. And for some, that was really significant money, really significant money. And that meant some of the farmers in Anand pooled their payouts to form a tool library, a farming tool library, so that they could share the tools. One woman said that her husband, she had some debt is a huge issue, and onerous, not usurious interest rates, and we call them, you know, loan shark type loans, where the interest is way too high, and that's a factor in heat. So I'm going to tell a story the next time I have a chance about someone specifically and her story, and you'll see exactly how the effects of one heat incident, what that means for her and her health and her family and her income. But the most powerful story is that a husband had a debt to someone and he couldn't pay it, and this nefarious person, the person he owed it to, said, "Your wife can work it off." And he said, "You're going to need to work off this debt." And the wife knew what that meant. That meant predation and harm. That didn't mean what we would want it to mean. And she used the insurance payout to pay off the debt. And she said, "I restored my dignity." They're powerful stories.
I think thank you for sharing that and for bringing to this group the harsh realities of you know, what it means when we talk in sort of these vague terms of 1.5 and 2 and cost and and what just heat, you know, which most South Asians grew up with and didn't think much about.
Just hot.
Just how absolutely devastating it will be in the lives and livelihoods of tens of millions or hundreds of millions around the world. I have a follow-up question for you, Kathy. This insurance product, the parametric insurance product, at its face value sounds tremendous. There is a lot more that you've encountered behind the scenes to implement a product like that. What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen with the development of this product?
So one of the things that, and this gets to yours and Rob's project, and that is that the data is insufficient to really tell us exactly what the condition is. So if, you know, you think about temperature data and where is that data collected? And, you know, as a global issue, you may have seen a recent stat that said that Africa has 10% of the weather stations it needs. And I think Germany, one country, has, I've forgotten exactly the number, but it's staggering disproportionality. And so we don't have the data, we don't have the weather stations, and I don't speak just about IMD in India. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the weather stations everywhere are not calibrated to where a person is working and standing on either the asphalt selling something or wherever it is that they are. And so it's a little bit inexact, you know, we're using modeled satellite data. We use ERA-5 data, there's NASA power data, you know, there's IMD data, and those are all data sets that, you know, Copernicus is a piece of that, but we're not really getting to what's happening to the body of a human being suffering from extreme heat. And so that's why I'm so excited about calibrating to specific conditions. The other thing is that health data is so important. I mean, I would just go with mortality data. Morbidity data is a dream, you know, mortality data is achievable. But we don't have a sense of how long you know, who's dying from heat. We know these numbers are highly, highly under reported. And some of that's just we're just not used to tracking it. Someone comes into the emergency room. I mean, this is your area, and we're not checking the box that says this is a heat related injury or a heat related death. Maybe in workers' comp data in the U.S., but and I do want to talk in a little bit about there's some U.S. component because women's climate shock insurance initiative and concept we're going to be exploring, taking it to women working in markets, informal markets in West Africa, and also street vendors in California. And so challenges the data, challenges philanthropy isn't moving quickly enough. So we don't have a real sense of this urgency, and the stories of people and their experiences, we're trying to tell them and also push for. This is a humanitarian response. It's also adaptation, to prevent future. We're reducing risks, we're transferring risks, but we're also getting people aware of how hot it is and how dangerous it is. And so it's a multi-headed beast, but the systems around it are not fit for purpose.
And Kathy, like to appreciate the kind of work that you have started and doing. This insurance has helped so many, like 46,000 Indian women avoid deadly work during the heat waves. And the significance of that is many workplaces have some kind of basic policies, humanitarian policies. It's not guided by the government or anything, but the humanitarian policies to avoid work during the afternoons. For example, these women can stop working at 1 o'clock and they can start work again at 3:30 or something. And then they are allowed to take the big break during the afternoon. But what these women, when we go and speak to these women, they say they would actually like to get back to their family and children because they still have to complete their targets. So instead of finishing their work at 4, they have to finish it at 6:30 in the evening. They do get the break from the heat, but they have to be in the workplace or in their work location till about 6:30. And many of them did not get any overtime pay for this. It's just that they're protected from heat, but not from the other duties that they're expected to do. So such an important work that you're doing. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know Sachi's going to ask me how we're going to sustain it. I know that's next. But maybe someone else.
To go for it. How are we going to sustain it? Well, this is, it sounds a little fantastical to be true and scalable, right? Every time it gets hot and we're saying the world is going to get hotter, how can we actually afford to pay workers around the world, including your work in California? So Kathy, and then with Rob, I want to draw you guys back into the conversation, but Kathy, now's a good time to talk about sustainability.
Sure. Well, I think we can't really answer that definitively. I mean, the operating environment for doing this kind of work is changing daily. And, every headline is hottest day ever. Oh, wait, tomorrow. Oh, hottest day ever. I mean, maybe we're going to hear that again today, Sunday, Monday. And so, and the way that insurance works is there are risks that we can hold and there are risks that we cannot hold. And the risks we can't afford financially to hold, we want to transfer to someone else. You can transfer it to the private market. You can transfer it to a risk pool. And so the idea is that as the risk goes up, the price will go up because it's more likely it's going to happen. And so we need to reduce the risk. And reducing the risk would be to transition away from fossil fuels and do the mitigation work that we know we have to do. And somehow we're not doing. This is remarkable. But if we look at reducing the risks for workers, there are limits to this. It's not a magic wand, but we experimented with a protective equipment. So solar lights to work at night for farmers. That means that this is a hard life. So don't get me wrong. This is not like, okay, everything's okay now, but it is some sort of assistance that reduces the risk of her loss of income because her health is affected. So solar lights mean she can farm at night or that she can do home-based work inside if she doesn't have power. It also means her kids can do their homework. It means a lot of good things, which we're learning as we do our, evaluation. It also means that they have fewer scorpion and snake bites while they're working outside at night. So there's some very tangible things that we can do to reduce risks to health with physical things. Umbrellas for street vendors, cool boxes for vendors, a lunch box. We distributed 20,000 water coolers. You know, the carcinogens in the plastic water jugs are melting from the heat into the water, making them sick. And so these water jugs now save money and provide enough water for a day. We could get into the lack of access to toilets, which means you don't want to drink water, which means you have a UTI, which means you're dehydrated. And so this is a big challenge. And the world needs to see this. And as you said, Sashi, I think you said they're unseen and unheard. And we want to change that because we have to, but we want to reduce the risk. And so when a combination of things like entrepreneurial loans, grants that allow you to invest in different kinds of businesses, is there business opportunity? I think the answer is yes. I'm thinking specifically of Seva, but there, this is people everywhere in this new cooler economy. So cold chain and cold storage and nature-based solutions and planting trees, monitoring trees. There's a program in Freetown that we work with we have a team member in Freetown, and Freetown is a tree town, and so we could tell you about that. But sustainability, I think there's still a question mark over it. Can we reduce the risk enough? Does it turn into humanitarian aid? Maybe, we combined a cash layer with insurance this time, and we'll keep experimenting with that. But I think we want to be reducing the risk. We have an early warning system that goes with it. And so you can make different decisions. And then the big banana for us is a forecast-based product. So we don't pay when the temperature hits 40 or 45, 43, whatever. We pay when the forecast says it's going to be 40 or 45.
That's super important. And just to draw the listeners in, if we wait till after a hot day to do the payout, the worker is always going to be skeptical. What if it did not hit the trigger threshold? I'm not going to take that risk. I'm going to work. And yes, if I get a payout, I'll make some more cash. And so it just beats the whole purpose when we do this retroactively. And so forecasting is, it's really hard for businesses, especially if you're in the business of providing insurance, because you don't want to get it wrong, even if this is a social enterprise and the idea is to support workers. You don't want to be forecasting days that ended up not being hot either. So longer conversation, if there is time later, I want to ask you about financial institutions and who is actually willing to shell out money for this. But Rob and Vidya, the questions for you all are the following as you think about drawing this conversation to a close. Kathy talked about these gaps in data and policy. There's a lot of attention on the Community Hacks project. It is one of the largest longitudinal studies of this kind. Rob, how are you finding anything? You're a couple of months in, and it's too early. We need, season on season variation over time across trades, across latitudes, longitudes. But in this early phase of, the first few households that you deployed your sensors in, are you finding anything that underscores the need for your work?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very early stage, as you mentioned, but anyone who's worked in this space will tell you that it's extremely difficult to measure temperatures and physiological responses, particularly in real world context. So this is actually still quite a large data set. And some really important insights that are coming out that I think, anyone on the call here probably, we know that, or at least suspected that this was occurring, but now we're actually be able to put data to it. Big one is these houses, particularly for these informal workers, are extremely hot. But the more important point is that they don't quite follow the temperature variation of the outdoors. So for example, they might not get quite as hot as it is outdoors, though we are seeing some houses which actually are very close to maximum temperatures during the day. But what ends up happening is the house actually stays warm into the evening and especially overnight. So, and I think in most so far houses that we've monitored, temperatures overnight are consistently hotter than outdoors. So these temperatures are just not cooling down. And we spoke a lot on the call about, effects on sleep. I mean, it's been hot here in Boston. I don't have an air conditioner where I'm staying. And I wake up, even though I'm spending the day in a air conditioned office, I wake up feeling worse and worse as the days go by. Can only imagine how this is if you're also having to go and work in hot environments. Another actually kind of surprising maybe not surprising, but a little bit unexpected outcome is that when you actually look at the wet bulb temperatures in these houses, so wet bulb just being a temperature metric that also accounts for humidity, which has, very strong physiological effects on the body, these temperatures stay elevated all the time.
All the
So what
time.
happens is that even after the temperature is cooling a little bit overnight, the humidity is increased. So yeah, it just highlights that heat stress is a 24/7 problem for these workers. And then, of course, we are seeing, even with the small range of temperatures that we have, we are starting to see effects on heart rate, how hard the heart is working throughout the day, as well as changes in sleep duration. We need, as you mentioned, a larger range of temperatures to look at these a little bit further, but very important. But I think where the key to this comes in, and especially with the products that Kathy talked about, these insurance products, and even just our definition of heat waves, a lot of times just come from meteorological definitions. And we're really hoping that this data can be used to, say, okay, if it's X temperature outside, what does this correlate to or translate to a person actually experiencing? So start to kind of think about how we define heat waves, how we define insurance products as worker person centric in terms of the triggers for them.
Yeah, this impact-centric definition of heat exposure is really important. There is a story from one of the street vendors in Ahmedabad where, Kathy, this was during the first round of insurance products last year, where she said, you may have decided that it's, 42 or 43 or 44 is a trigger for my health, but my vegetables are rotting at 40. And if the goal was to protect my livelihoods, right? The other thing, Vidya, that we're completely missing in the policy domain around the world is this recognition that long before mortality, is this huge zone of misery, right? There is true suffering,
Exactly.
physical, mental, with long-term impacts on health and immediate impacts on wages. How do we shift this policy debate? What needs to be done? What should the conversation in the global South, and particularly in India, be? 2 days ago, when the budget was tabled, it was decided, at least for now, that heat would not be declared a disaster. And so sort of what are the ramifications of this kind of work?
Rightly said, Sachit, it's just not about mortality. It's about the quality of life of people, already poor people, the impoverished ones. It's getting worse by the day because of heat. And the slum dwellers who do not have access to, that's where these workers live, who do not have access to electricity. See, they might have the machines like the fans, but if you don't have the electricity to run it, they are just machines, right? So that's something that we also see every day in our work. See, India has labor laws that can protect workers from extreme heat. It's not that the laws are not there. There are policies as well, but there are limited provisions as to how these can be monitored. Who is monitoring this? When the government says that workers cannot be working outside beyond a certain temperature, who is monitoring it? The monitoring mechanism is extremely poor. Just not in India, like in many of the low and middle income countries, that's what it is. So what currently exists is the center has issued guidelines for workers during hot summers, suggesting that they should be rescheduling their working hours, and these construction companies or these workplaces, the business owners should be ensuring drinking water facilities. They should be establishing provisions for emergency ice packs and heat illness prevention materials like electrolytes and stuff like that. These are all very good in paper, and many of the larger institutions are following it, most of these. For example, we work with Larsen & Toubro, we work with Appasamy Real Estates. So they are bigger companies, and they have they have the resources, and they follow the laws and policies, and they have their own institutional policy as to how you can protect these workers. So which is fantastic, and other institutions can follow the cue. But many of these suggestions are not binding on the states. Many of these policies are not binding on the states. So workers in the informal sector or left at the mercy of their employers. If the employer decides to give them reschedule their working hours, they can work. One of the things that we would say is when it comes to the salt pans, it's just not the employer. They have an salt pan union. These workers are out in the open. The white salt, it's reflecting all the heat back. And there is not even one shade because it's a salt pan and they are in the water, right? And they are in salt water. The humidity is very high. Workers are suffering. And the workers union, the salt pan workers union, decided that they would reschedule the work. But these women, these workers, sorry, not the women, the workers, they decided not to do that because they would rather get the work done and get home early rather than sitting around waiting for the temperatures to go down. So it works actually both ways. It's just not policies, or even if the policies are there and if they are being implemented, there is an rebellion thing coming from the workers because they think, what would we do working sitting around for 3 hours in the sun, right? So this is something that happens in many middle income countries, including Indonesia and Bangladesh and Pakistan that we work with. One of the things that can be done is there must be a three-pronged policy approach. There must be definitely interventions that are mandated by policies. There must be mandated regulations on water, rest and shade, cooling infrastructures at work sites. And that it has to have also a monitoring mechanism because that is only way we can reduce heat. We cannot have an umbrella under the sun. So definitely each of these workplaces should have some provisions to do all of this. Second thing is the social security measures, health insurance and financial support for the workers who are working in the heat. Kathy's work is fantastic, but when we're speaking about sustainability, I would like to say that many of these domestic workers who are moving from house to house, they work in 3 or 4 houses. Nowadays, it's not domestic workers are not just women, it's also men who are migrants who come with the families. The man and the woman work in all these houses, or they work as housekeeping staff in multiple small companies where they move from one place to another. And when it comes to insurance for these people, government has rolled out an insurance for workers. Only thing is their awareness about all of this. They are not even aware such an insurance exists. So if there is a heat stroke or there are heat related illnesses, they are not able to go to work and they have to be hospitalized. These workers are not even aware about such an insurance that is even existing for. So the government has made some changes. Of course, the government, the insurance does not cover the lost wages, which Kathy is trying to do. But in spite of all these positive things, or whatever could be done for a country with a 1.4 billion and 673 million informal workers, things are not reaching the people. Another important thing is the health communication that needs to happen to the workers. How can you protect yourself? Taking this 5-minute or a 10-minute break every hour could probably protect this worker from having a heat stroke, which is scientifically proven. Reduce the core body temperature, then start working. You know, this kind of information, how they have to hydrate themselves, how they can cover them, these kind of communications, even if it reaches these workers, many of these fatalities or many of these heat-related illnesses could be reduced. And for example, ICICI Lombard paid about 50,000 women enrolled in the program. I think it's part of the daily wages thing that Kathy was talking about. In spite of the center's preparedness, I'm talking about Indian government's preparedness for responding to heat waves is very good. They have tried their best. The reports are looking very good. The infrastructure and the health system is not as strong to manage it. For example, the workers who are going to be affected the most are the workers who are working in agriculture or in the salt pans or in the brick kilns, which are away from the healthcare access, correct? So if somebody is affected in a brick kiln, somebody has heat stroke in a brick kiln, how are we going to get them to the hospital? So they are left at the mercy of the primary healthcare centers where they are not, the workers on the healthcare workers are not trained even to handle it. So
There you raise,
kind of,
yeah,
yeah.
you raise really important issues here, and I want to sort of build off what you said about health and also about the breaks and
Yeah.
you know the difficulty with people taking breaks because they want to finish their work, they're wage workers, right? So two thoughts. The first is just an observation where you know it is very interesting how the global conversation around this just assumes that workers must work and have the same productivity through the summer, right? In this sort of relentless, you know, this model of relentless growth that the world has been forced to sign up to. Those that make the rules have always been very comfortable taking their summers off. But the idea that these millions who sort of labor shouldn't have to labor is something that is so controversial, right? The idea that you give cash payouts when it's hot. The second conversation, the second issue that you raised about health systems not being prepared. You know, we have a few minutes, and I see a couple of physicians from India in the audience, and I hope they contribute to this. Is a problem that we face in the US healthcare system as well,
Yeah.
where the management of heat is still medicalized. But the
Mhm.
vast majority of heat exposure and the zone of misery that we talk about happens outside the health system. It's happening at home, it's happening in the fields, it's happening at the construction sites, often really far away from the medical system. And there's no way for these folks to even access the medical system in most parts of the world. And you know, this is probably a part 3 webinar that talks about how do we think about the health issues and the management of heat. You know, if you talk to Rob, he says, well, if it boils down to this one maxim: if it is hot, you cool down, right? But how you do so really depends on your socioeconomic demographic. Kathy, I would like to conclude with inviting you to share a story that you've shared with us before, that really drives home the point about how the impact of heat is not direct but indirect, and then there's sort of a negative cascade on wages, on health, and on your family from just one hot afternoon. You're mute.
I also want to second the need for that. I think you described it, that the training of even healthcare workers is not kept up with how extensive the heat effects are, and then how to recognize the signs and what to do about them. And so we still have a literacy gap that's quite immense, and the nighttime temperatures and understanding their importance, and you know, a cool day and then a hot day, and you'll have less sickness and less death when you have a hot day and a hot day versus a cool day and a hot day. And so, you know, you might have the temperature, but the temperature is not the only way that we are going to, you know, we need health data, we need cloud cover data, we need nighttime temperatures. The diurnal range is shrinking in some of the most, you know, and there more and more on this later, but you know, in synoptic climatology, meteorology, the air masses where people die the most are dry tropical and is it subtropical? There are 2 air masses where you see most of the death. And you know, that's not known. We don't know that. We don't know when we're in a certain air mass. We were not looking at the cloud cover as a predictor, or, you know, so we've got a lot to learn collectively as a society. And, you know, some people need to know it before others need to know it, and then have the capacity to do something about it. And so that leads me to a story about Geeta Ben, and I have her permission to tell her story. She is a head loader. She is in Ahmedabad. There are 1,000 head loaders like Geeta Ben. She's 54 and she has 4 grown kids. She moves fabric from one vendor to another, wholesale to retail, or manufacturers, but in small shops in the market. And she is financially responsible for 50% of the value of the product she's carrying. She's mostly carrying on her head, but they share a bicycle that has a bed in the back of it for carrying bigger loads. Until SEVA renegotiated that, the head loaders were responsible for 100% of the loss. So when they set out with the raw material, the fabric, and if something happens to it in the way, they would have been 100% responsible, which means they take loans at high interest that take years to pay off. So SEVA and their legal team helped negotiate. Well, it's not a legal team. I mean, these are informal, but negotiate an agreement with the vendors to bring that down. So Geeta Ben also is not able to go inside the shops where her clients are. They don't want her to wait where it's cool, where there's a fan. So she waits outside. And so a couple of months ago, during the worst of the heat, which would be the end of May, in Ahmedabad, she picked up, or was waiting outside. She picked up the load, put it on her head, set out, and blacked out. She passed out from the heat and broke her leg and had a light head injury. And the fabric she was carrying was dirty, fell into onto the ground, and so some of it was ruined. And then she needed to go to the doctor, pay for a cast and some medication. The private hospital took advantage of her and, gave her an IV that she didn't need. She took a loan for the medication and the cast. She couldn't work for 2 weeks, and then she didn't have enough to eat. And so, though her relationship with, those are her clients, so she could go back after 2 weeks, and her daughter was able to cover for her while she was out. But it meant that she had a loan for the fabric, she had a loan for the cast, she had a loan for the IV and the medication she may or may not have needed. And this insurance was used to pay the medical bills. She paid off the loan and was able to buy food for herself. And so, how many Geeta Bens are there? You said 625 million informal workers just in India. I saw somebody commented about, South Asia is bigger than India. Yes, we also work in Pakistan, and it's we're working in Peshawar, so it's some different conditions, but still the heat and the lack of water are creating economic stress, not to mention skin diseases and things that are extremely uncomfortable and keep you from working. But point is, with Geeta Ben, she was able to pay it off. And so how many Geeta Bens are there, and what are the ways that we can support? And there are, and I shouldn't say it that way. What I mean is, like, how do we make the systems work to help women like Geeta Ben face what's coming? I mean, the Self-Employed Women's Association members, there are almost 3 million of them. And you this could be said for the Women Farmers Association of West Africa, or lots of the parts of BRAC. I mean, these are like maybe 1 billion people. I think, Sachi, you said, hundreds of millions. I'm sure we have a number, but this isn't sustainable what we're doing. Our financial system is broken and kind of crushing us. So the story is, how do we make the systems work so that story is not repeated 1 billion times, because it doesn't work for any of us. None of us make it when Geeta Ben doesn't make it. So thanks for letting me share that story.
Kathy, that's a poignant note to end on, that we're all in this together. We're on the hour, and I want to acknowledge that there are a couple of unanswered audience questions, and we'll address them when we post this online. We'll make sure that we've been able to respond to very specific questions about contractual work in the power plants in India and stuff. So I want to acknowledge that there are questions here that have been unanswered, but we would like to end on time. Thank you kindly, Vidya, Rob, Kathy, for joining us, and for the participants for listening patiently. Until next time, thank you.